More than 40 African lawmakers met in Addis Ababa to show support for Israel, especially during its ongoing conflict with Gaza. Now, they signed a resolution stating that Israel has the right to Jerusalem as its capital and also condemned international criticism against Israel. The meeting aimed to strengthen ties between Africa and Israel, highlighting how Israel's technology could help Africa's young population grow economically. However, many African countries still support Palestine, making the lawmakers' efforts challenging. Now, joining us on the conversation to speak more on this is Dennis Ntumbi. He is African Director, Israel Allies Foundation. Hello, Dennis. Thank you for joining us at this time.
Thank you very much for having me on air.
All right, so you're the convener of this particular event, this summit that took place. Can you share briefly and in specifics, events that actually led to the decision to convene this gathering?
Thank you very much. This was the first of its kind. It was the first Africa-Israel parliamentary summit. And this really was a meeting that was gathered under the principles of faith-based parliamentary diplomacy, is where members of parliament gather to practice international affairs. Within majority of the constitution, members of parliament are elected directly by the people, unlike the diplomats. And therefore, members of parliament are the authentic voices of the people in nations. And so over 24 of members of parliament from over 20 African nations met in Addis Ababa. We convened in Addis Ababa, and we discussed things and matters within the international fora that are important to our faith, and that being the civil liberties of the nation of Israel, and what it is that we can do to collaborate together between African nations and the nation of Israel. And that's its technological advancement within the areas of agriculture, within the areas of security, defense, and many other opportunities that we can get to do together. But most importantly, this meeting was convened in light of what it is that we are seeing: unfair and unfortunate lawfare against the state of Israel, especially within the space of the UN and other courts of high jurisdiction, where we are seeing that propaganda is being used to advance lawfare, especially by the enemies and militia forms that are against the nation of Israel. And we Christian legislators across the continent of Africa decided to meet and stand with the nation of Africa, with the nation of Israel. So this was a two-day meeting, the first of its kind, and we commissioned the Addis Ababa Declaration. And this will be how we will conduct our affairs going forward. And it was overwhelmingly attended by both African legislators, experts across international law, humanitarian law, and also legislators from the Knesset in Israel. And we thank God for this huge achievement.
All right, Dennis. Now, did the summit address the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And if so, what solutions or recommendations were proposed?
The general idea around, of course, it touched that. The general idea of that is concepts within the fact that the confines of how Israel is advancing the war, and this is really within the defense mechanism and the principles of which Israel must then defend itself against its own sovereignty and against the wanton slaughter of its own citizens, at the end of the day. And they are historical lies that have been perpetrated across the broad spectrum on whether who is the legitimate owner of the land, the rise of the term Palestine, and who exactly, owns the dynamics between Judea and Samaria, which has been named West Bank, who is the legitimate owner of the area and the space that is called Gaza. At the end of the day, what rights does Israel have within the precincts of the international law to defend itself? We also discussed matters of terrorism. We discussed matters of international law, we had experts across the board who really are the ones that have been, defending Israel within this space. And the declaration has been signed, as I said. But one of the things that we concluded is that Israel has a right to defend itself, and Israel cannot exist with a neighbor that their sole objective is the extinction of the Jews.
But many actually argue, Dennis, that Israel's military actions violate international law. What arguments do you use in addressing concerns about civilian casualties and humanitarian issues, and that which also depicts Israel as the aggressor?
That's inaccurate. We both know what happened on the October 7th, is that Israel was attacked. And Israel was attacked by a terrorist entity called Hamas. It is the same entity that has been subjugating the rights of the residents in Gaza and turning them to be militias by force. This is the same entity that has ensured that schools and kindergartens and hospitals are used for the purposes of terror. The entire Gaza is they've dug terror tunnels. And they attacked innocent Israeli citizens. They breached, the territory of Israel. They murdered, they killed, they raped, and Israel responded just the way any other nation would respond. And the goal for Israel in Gaza is to eliminate the terror infrastructure and to take out the combatants and clean out Gaza. That the same action must never happen again. And I have never seen an army that is as moral as the Israel Defense Forces. The question about casualties, civilian casualties, of course, has been there. And we have seen the least casualties in any war that has ever been advanced globally. And Israel have a concept that they call knocking the roofs, where they tell the citizens to move to areas that are safe because they need to work on the terror infrastructure at the end of the day. But you're looking at an entity that is a proxy of Iran, a militia, that their only goal is to exterminate the nation of Israel. And therefore, Israel has a mandate to protect the integrity of its borders, but more so protect its citizens, that this must never happen again. And anyone who understands the concepts of warfare and international law, they know that the IDF is well within the limits of international law at the end of the day. And the one who is violating this international law is indeed Hamas. And now we are seeing a new front that has opened up in the north, which is Hezbollah. Up in Lebanon, in the north of Lebanon. So Israel is within its mandate to protect itself and to protect its citizens and to protect the integrity of its borders.
All right. Now, in the summit or during the summit, religious leaders, emphasized a spiritual connection, stating that they see the war against Israel as a war against God's authority. Now, in what ways do you see religious narratives influencing policy decisions, and how do you leverage this in your advocacy?
The most important thing that we need to remember is that Israel is indeed the land which Christianity premises its heritage. Without Israel, we wouldn't have the Bible. Without Israel, we wouldn't have the prophets of old. Without Israel, we wouldn't even have the Messiah, most importantly. Without Israel, we have no prophecies. We have no glory. We don't have any reference whatsoever to our Christian faith. We can't point to a piece of real estate where our Christian faith emanated from. And interesting enough is that there's a vote that's going to happen in the UN where they're saying that the Jews are occupiers of the land of Judea and Samaria, where this is where 90% of the Bible sits and rests. That's where King David ruled. So you can see all these fallacies and false narratives that are created are indeed endangering the heritage of our Christian faith. And without those locations, when you read the Bible clearly, you see that this land was given to Abraham by God. And one of the mandates that Abraham was given was to protect that covenant. And today, what God gave them as 100%, unfortunately, they only own 12%. And even that 12%, somebody wants to take it away. When you're telling Jews to leave Judea and Samaria, which quote unquote, anti-Semitically, you named it the West Bank. The truth of the fact is that you're trying to annihilate the Jews, take what is theirs illegally, and at the end of the day, you're obliterating the Christian faith. Christians have an obligation to say, we have a stake in Israel. That is where our religion is based, and nobody should take it away, or at the end of the day, harm the Jews that we owe the genesis of our faith.
Okay. Now, just before we let you go, Dennis, how do you plan to assuage possible diplomatic fallout from critics, particularly within multilateral organizations like the African Union, and also in light of South Africa's efforts to bring Israel before the International Court of Justice?
When you read, especially for the International Court of Justice, when you read Judge Sebutunde's submissions, you will know that her submissions indeed destroyed the false narratives that the rest of the other judges put through. This is where the accurate truth sits in. When you look at institutions like the African Union and the institutions like the United Nations and other institutions of higher standing, unfortunately, they have been captured by nefarious organizations that are out to hurt Israel. And one of the things that we're seeing is out of the conference, there has been a vote that has been done today at the UN. It's an advisory that came from the international courts at the end of the day. And we have seen that majority of the African nations have either abstained or they have supported Israel towards the vote. So we are seeing that the positivity of using faith-based diplomacy and joining that faith-based diplomacy with parliamentary diplomacy, where parliaments are basically the oversight authority within every nation towards the executive, we are seeing a positive change in terms of how African nations will be able to work closely with Israel. Not only that, one of the things that we have provided is the truth of how nations treat Israel at the UN. Majority of the Christian nations, and I'm saying Christian nation based on the fact that these nations we're working with, the majority of the population is Christian by nature, and they love the nation of Israel. That's where our Messiah comes from. Our nation's politicians and diplomats have been assaulting Israel in the dark, and we don't get to get these statistics. So out of the UN, we are supplying these statistics to every nation, the church population, so that they can keep their politicians accountable on some of these nefarious things, the warring that is happening at the UN at the end of the day, where diplomats are bought for 10 shekels to be able to persecute the nation of Israel. The general idea is that we have seen that if we don't stand with the nation of Israel, they want to take the 12% that is remaining. They don't want the nation of Israel to exist. They are now going to do a vote at the UN where they're asking the Jews to leave Judea and Samaria, which is named West Bank. Historically, that's an injustice. Technically, there's so many propaganda that has been done even to advance lawfare, that the UN itself has lost its integrity. The African Union is about to lose its integrity. The courts of high jurisdictions are about to lose their integrity. And the fight against Israel is a fight for the authority of God. And most importantly, the identity and the destiny of Israel is something that needs to be taught carefully to the church. We have a duty to defend the great nation of Israel, because without it, we would never even have the Bible. The writers of the Bible, 40 of them, 39 of them are Jewish. All the prophets of the Bible are Jewish. The Messiah is Jewish. He's even called the Lion of the tribe of Judah, even when he sits at the right hand of the Father. We have an obligation as a Christian nations to stand with the nation of Israel at the time when it's most perilous. All the 16 predictions in the Bible about the nation of Israel, 14 of them have already been already active, and the 2 of them include the coming of the Messiah. And this is what the enemy does not want to have, because in the millennial rule, the 1,000 years, he says, the piece of real estate that I want to rule from is Jerusalem. And that is what they're trying to prevent. We have an obligation to defend the nation of Israel.
All right. Well, Quite an interesting conversation, Dennis. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak to us on this. Dennis Ntumbi,
thank you very much.
Africa Director, Israel Allies Foundation, reaching us from Kenya.